Let me recognize the gentleman from Michigan to inquire. Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you, Ambassador Lighthizer, for being here. And beyond that, thank you for your willingness to engage with us on a regular basis. It makes a difference, and I very much appreciate that. You've been quite accessible. And I have a question, but before I get into that, I'd also want to note how much I appreciate you bringing up the polysilicon issue with the Chinese during these negotiations. It's important that we address China's retaliatory tariffs in response to legitimate American trade remedies. That's important to me. It's important to my district, and I appreciate your efforts in that regard. Obviously, the Congress and the administration need to work together to deal with China and to hold China accountable for unfair practices that are costing American jobs. And I think there's general agreement on that score, bipartisan agreement. Many of us wish that it was more of a multilateral approach, but one area that I know was addressed, but I wasn't here to hear your answer, has to do with currency manipulation. President Trump promised to label China a currency manipulator on his first day in office during his campaign. Obviously, that didn't happen. And I know you agree with the President's general sentiment that China engages in bad behavior and manipulates currency. In fact, in 2010, you testified to this committee that China should be labeled a currency manipulator and was in violation of its WTO obligations. You have thoughtfully outlined a list of actions that the U.S. needs to take to address China's currency manipulation, but I would like to get your perspective on whether or not the understanding that the President recently announced with China on currency issues meets the requirements that you had laid out in your previous testimony. Simply put, does this deal meet the standards that you laid out in 2010?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I would say, first of all, whether or not China is manipulating its currency right now, competitive, is an issue that we can talk about. It probably is, but it's probably not manipulating it to lower its currency. It's probably manipulating it to raise its currency because they're in a different position than they were in 2010. So that's one thing I would say. It is not a foregone conclusion that China is manipulating its currency down right now. And I would say that this is a decision that the Secretary of Treasury makes in conjunction with the President, not me. But I do not think you can make a case that right now China is intervening in the market to have their currency be weaker. Right? That's not in their interest, and they're probably doing the exact opposite of it. Have they done it in the past? In my judgment, absolutely true. And were they doing it when I made that testimony? That's absolutely true.
And I don't think you can rule out the possibility that some moment in the future we could see that happen again. And that's why the structural approach to these issues is more important than looking at this moment in time, or even in the context of a deal that we might see negotiated is founded on sort of temporary transactional benefits as opposed to structural benefits.
I completely agree with your statement, absolutely 100%. And what we want to get is commitments to not have competitive devaluations in the future and to a certain level of transparency. If you have those two things and they're enforceable, then you can guard against that problem in the future. And the other point I made before you weren't here is that this is an issue beyond China. We think of it as China. There's a lot of places in Asia where this is a problem and a lot of places where it has been a problem in the past. And there's a lot of people in the United States that aren't working right now because of this issue. A lot of people who were told, well, you just didn't do a good job, and they were doing a fine job. They just got cheated on currency.
My time's expired. I appreciate your attention to these issues. Thank you.